Martial arts musings, yeah.
All right, we can get started. Welcome, everybody, to Martial Arts Musings. I am your host, Dwight, and with me today is head instructor of MKG Seattle, Mr. Andy Wilson. Thank you for joining this podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. This podcast is brought to you by MKG Seattle. Learn, play, sweat. I believe that's the slogan, if I recall off the top of my head.
That is one of the slogans, yes. Very good.
All right, and with that, let's get started. So just to kick this off, let's discuss a little bit about your background. How did you get into martial arts? And then kind of build on that, and then we can talk about how you moved over here to Seattle, how you started the school and such.
Well, I kind of was born with an interest in martial arts. I don't know why. I just remember being extremely interested in martial arts through Kung Fu, which was on TV when I was a youngster, through the beginnings of the Chuck Norris movies on television. I just remember thinking that was the coolest thing I've ever seen. And that was when I was 7, 8 years old that I can remember that. But I got started in a traditional martial art called Chuan Mu boxing, which was pretty much the only thing available in rural Minnesota where I grew up.
Oh, wow.
So that I was interested for many years before I became old enough to join the adult class. And so I was 14 when I first started my formal training.
How long did you stay in that program for?
4 years. I stayed through black belt and then taught for another year after that. But I had simultaneously already gotten interested in cross-training Jeet Kune Do lineage. Okay. And once I got a car and made the big drive down to the cities, the scary cities, that's where I started training at. My main martial art influence, the Minnesota Kali group.
Gotcha. And so what really transitioned you from your initial art into MKG lineage, or the Jeet Kune Do lineage? So why change after spending 4 or 5 years?
Well, to me, it didn't feel like a choice. So,
okay.
No, I think that the formative things that I got from my traditional martial arts training is among the most valuable things I've ever been taught in retrospect.
I see.
Although I was not, maybe being so young, even at the time of getting my black belt, I wasn't as wise as I should have been, and maybe I would have stuck with it longer, but I was just really intrigued by the practicality of what I saw and experienced with my first exposure to that sort of martial art, basically through the Bruce Lee, Filipino martial art, Muay Thai, through that blend. It was just the training method was so drastically different. It was like contact from day one, and there was no kata, and everything made sense. You didn't have to decipher anything. It was like, oh, okay.
Oh, I just do this? Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so, okay, just do that. Yeah, I don't have to figure it out. But I just, in retrospect, it didn't seem like a choice. It's just like, okay, yeah, of course.
Of course, I got to move on to this next part.
The
next place.
Next place, yeah.
Nice. And so how long did you stay there? What was this the original MKG? Or was this?
Yeah, this is like in 1987 or 1988, I started training there. But my first exposure was while I was in my other martial arts still. My instructor had encouraged me to go see Dan Inosanto.
Oh, nice.
Dan, who was doing a seminar at the Minnesota Kali group, and that was my first exposure. And I just described it to many people as my experience at the seminar. I was completely over my head as far as the things that we're doing. I just looked at it and I'm like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
That is so cool. I think it was Sifu Inosanto demonstrating with his now wife Paula. And it's just, everything was just so fast and so efficient, and it was just so much different,
Yeah.
So I started taking regular classes there while I was still in high school, but it was mostly concentrating in the summer when I wasn't in school, still in high school. And then my regular training partner and I would practice throughout the week and throughout the year. And then later, over the next 10 years or so, I just continued to train when I could, and then eventually really picked it back up in earnest after I was done with college and
very cool
stuff.
And so how long did it take for you to move from Minnesota out to here in Seattle then? So how many years did you spend training at MKG in Minnesota before you were like, I'm going to go open up a...
Well, I started training consistently with my training partners, with classes when I could, with seminars and stuff. That was like in 1988. And then over the course of the next 10 years, I moved out here to Seattle in 1999.
Okay.
So that was like 10 years
Right.
of training.
Okay.
And then I moved out here.
Gotcha. And so what made you want to open up a school after that?
Well, originally I had no intention of moving to Seattle to open a martial arts school. I actually didn't think that I could make a living teaching martial arts. So it never really occurred to me as a viable career option at the time. But I moved out here, and gradually it just became obvious that if I wanted to continue, I needed to create my own training partners so that I could continue to progress, develop students so that I could train. And that was originally my primary motivation for starting classes, was to have people to train with. And then it quickly kind of morphed from there over the course of 3 months to a year, 3 months part-time to a year and a half of teaching full-time and working full-time, to where I had to kind of make my decision, like I'm doing better at this than I thought I could, and I'm burning out, so I need to do one or the other. And so it kind of happened accidentally and organically, as I might say.
Yeah, now you've been doing it for 15, 16 years.
And 15 years later, and 3 locations later, and yep, we're still going.
Excellent, excellent. So I guess now let's look at why continue with MKG instead of starting a separate kind of entity, if you will.
Wow, that's a great question. Again, for me, like the first thoughts is I didn't feel like I would want to do it any other way. So I think I was the second place in the world. My friend from Bournemouth, England, I think was the first person to kind of start teaching a formal MKG branch in England. And then a couple of months later, I started my place, but I was the second branch. And it just, because of the way that we do things, and the way that we emphasize cross-training, and the arts that we put together, and the way that we do, and the way that the environment is supposed to work is so completely a Rick Fay thing, that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't give him props by calling my place MKG Martial Arts.
I see.
Because it just doesn't happen this way anywhere else that I know of. I try to make my school as close to that as I can, that environment that I can.
So what were the 3, I guess, main concepts from the original MKG that you really wanted to bring over?
Well, the first one is like this movement that martial arts is something that should be mainstream.
Okay.
It shouldn't be. It should be something that everybody should have access to, and it shouldn't be like so militaristic or so odd or so quirky or weird that average people don't do it, because average people need the stress relief and the health benefit and and then to maybe even a lesser extent, they need the self-defense things. But that was the first thing, is like, how do you make these arts where, like normally like boxing or Muay Thai, how do you make these really hard combat sports, which where we really feel that those skill sets are at the heart of practical martial art for self-defense, but how do you make those experiences available for the average person who doesn't want to get a concussion a couple of times a year, or,
who doesn't want to compete, who doesn't,
or they're lawyers or actresses or whatever it is, and they don't want to go with black eyes. It's like, so that was first and foremost. It's like, how do you make the training work for normal people? Okay. And then I think the second piece of it would be, how do you also maintain this open-minded approach where you don't, where you learn to actively look for the best in different methods, and not pick and choose too fast,
Oh, I see.
where you accumulate a body of knowledge before you start, worrying about what you prefer or what you don't prefer. So you gain some competency in the different ranges,
I
the
see.
specialties.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think like a third thing is just a sense of fun about it. You have fun training,
Yeah.
and you make it sort of slightly irreverent with a lot of reverence at the same time. That where you're not taking it too seriously, but for those who really have a passion for it, there's an avenue. Those are the three things off the top of my mind that I feel are pillars of
The
what
pillars of
MKG is about.
I see. And so then building on top of that, what have you brought on top of those concepts?
I can't really say that I've added anything per se. It's just my little flavor.
Right.
I really like the three corners of the triangle. That's what martial arts got, these three corners. One is martial art as a martial art, martial art as a self-defense or combat,
Right.
and then martial art as a competition. There's three aspects to it, and they're constantly overflowing one to the other, but it's almost a balance. So I just tend to see things a little bit more on the art and care a little bit more about the self-defense aspects to it.
I see.
And I think also with my background in the traditional martial arts and the patience and the stages of growing and learning to listen to your Sifu and just do what you're told, that I learned from that traditional development.
Right.
I really have a little bit more of a fundamentals. I like focus a little bit more on fundamental things.
Okay.
So I mean, I like to really delve in and pick things apart and,
Right.
and work on the perfection part. Almost like the traditional kata.
Right.
Like I'm really interested in like what makes a jab perfect.
I see.
What makes your footwork perfect? What makes your step and slide perfect? What makes and I bring that sort of emphasis on that, or that that's one of the things I'm interested in. And then I also like I just changed a little bit with the emphasis, like adding things that I'm interested in,
Right.
like Savat.
Yeah.
Savat was always a part of what we did, but I brought it a little bit more to the forefront at my branch
I see.
because I think a martial artist should be able to kick.
Right.
And I really love the sophistication of the kicking,
Yeah.
and especially in a Bruce Lee lineage, with Bruce Lee
Yeah.
doing so much kicking. I don't know. I think I just grew up seeing that, so I want my students to at least try to develop along that cycle.
Oh, I see.
Not everybody can do it, but
Right.
But I mean, having some flavor or some exposure to it.
Definitely.
And then, like I said too, it's like when I see training methods from other arts that I think support that mission of like practicality,
Right.
and even artistry too. It's like I bring that into the mix and into the formal curriculum.
And you just got done redeveloping your own program, and how did that feel?
Well, I just reprinted my outlines for the mixed martial arts training. I should say like like our flavor of growth in Kali weaponry, Kali Panatukan, Muay Thai, Jeet Kune Do or Jun Fan martial arts, and then grappling. And it's basically it's a phase program
Right.
that was developed by Guru Dan and then really strongly, of course, through me, through Rick Fay, and I just reorganized my interpretation of that. And it's something I've been wanting to work on for years and years and years, but life got in the way of getting it in, and I just got it done. So that feels good.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. I gave birth. Yeah.
That hard, huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, I have these revisions on my computer. It's like 2004 to 2008 to 2010 to 2012.
This is what I need to change. This is what I need to change. This is what I need to
and
change.
then
I should add this. Take out this.
Exactly.
Nice.
And then now I printed it, distributed it. Now I'm already I gotta change this. That's like I see. My Sifu does the same thing.
Yeah.
It's constantly moving stuff around.
Right.
But that's the way that that's the way it should be.
Oh yeah, definitely.
We
I mean,
don't-
you should always try to re-examine. I mean, it's always going to be growing. It's always going to be changing. So you want to probably try and make it, I guess, as dynamic as possible, right?
Right.
And then as time goes, you learn more. You get introduced to different elements, and then you try to incorporate that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right.
Sounds like definitely like a lot of work.
Yeah.
So my next question, besides any of the martial arts that we currently work on here, what other art would you like to personally expand into, or that just interests you on a different level outside of what you've currently done or what you've done in the past and what you currently do? Or do you just already do everything that you want to do?
No. I see. There's a lot of things that I would like to do. I think you may know. I really am fascinated by the KC system.
Oh, yeah.
I really like what I've seen, and I know they've had an offshoot, and one of them is now called Defense Lab, and then the KC system. They're obviously very close, but I think that's fascinating. It's one of the most innovative things I've seen, and it's a very coherent system. I think that's cool. And then there's sub-styles of Filipino martial arts that I wish I had more access to.
Such as?
Well, I really like lightning scientific artists, and then
yeah.
I've got a friend and an instructor who comes over from Israel by way of the Philippines. But if I could go to the Philippines and learn some more there, or go to Israel and learn more from him, I would like that. I really like that system. Of course, there's so much more to learn through Guru Dan and Rick Fay. So I'd love to have an opportunity to go train back in Minnesota again, or go train in LA for an extended period of time. But then outside of that, I really regret that I didn't spend or have access to Kung Fu.
I see.
I mean, from a personal level, I look at a lot of the different things and then wish that I could do that.
I see.
So I'm fascinated by many different types of martial arts, and given the opportunity to train it, I would.
Nice. What do you believe is the most important aspect that you want to pass along to your students? And you can break this up any way you want. New students, old students.
That's a complicated one too.
Okay.
So
take your time, or if you want to give me a top three, make it.
To me, that's a great question, because what I would like to pass along to my students, there's internal qualities, like qualities of character, that's expressed by the way that you do martial arts, and then there's physical things, the way, having a particular base where I'm invested in this vision of how you do martial art. So they're two, and they kind of correlate, of course, but it's kind of exemplified in the mission statement that the Kali groups were about, which is just the personal improvement of each student, but then also fostering open-mindedness. I think that by training in multiple martial arts at the same time, there is an aspect of being open-minded to different approaches, and by doing that, I think it leads to character changes that show up in other areas of your life. And I think, so from that standpoint, it really makes me happy when students just adopt this open-minded principle.
Right.
And some of it is like, well, because Sifu says we should do that, so they're like, okay, I'll do that.
Right.
And then, so,
somebody told me I better do this.
But I kind of like that,
right?
That when people are open-minded, and especially for a certain period of time, because I think for for most people, for your first 4 to even 10 years, you should just try to get a base in something, and I think which leads into the other thing is what I would like to instill in my students is just be well-rounded. And it's I think you should have some capability in each of the major components of martial art. You should have something that's practical and works for weaponry, something kicking, something punching, something trapping, and then something grappling, standing and on the ground. And I think if you have a base in something a lot that you can either train and continue to train and improve in, but you have a method of being able to get better at that, then I think having that base is super important. Those are two things that I would like to instill in my students.
Excellent.
I think you asked me for 3, but that was 2, right?
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
Then I said, you can do 3, and you gave me 2, so it's all good.
Yeah.
What else would you like people to know about MKG here in Seattle? Whether it's your students or just the audience at large.
I think I'd like people to realize that, martial arts isn't always what you expect that it is, that it looks like.
Right.
So I mean, we were talking earlier about the way that the media warps your perception of what things are really like.
Right.
And I think the media and to some extent the martial arts industry has kind of really done a lot of damage
I see.
to people's perception of martial art. So I think one of the things is that people just don't realize that people do martial art the way that we do it.
Mm-hmm.
So because so many of the places that teach Thai or teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu
Right.
are very much oriented around competing. So if you look at the complexion of that student body, it's going to be, strongly male,
Right.
85% male between the ages of 20 and 30,
Right.
which is not, it's not a bad place to get better at martial arts, but
Right.
but also, you can actually take those training methods and make it available for other people, So, I mean, you don't have to be doing jump spinning kicks or sparring really hard to be able to get a door into those martial arts that works for everybody.
I see what you're saying.
Part of that, too, is that, I think people don't realize that not all martial arts wear uniforms and do katas and
Right.
things like that I think tend to alienate a lot of, especially Americans. Argue with my peers in the martial art world about
Right.
this, but I think a lot of people just look at that and be like, that's just something the kids did, but they don't really think there's a thing for adults to do.
I see.
Where they don't feel weird or...
Right. And do you think that comes from the independent nature of, like, the U.S.? I mean, if you force somebody to wear a certain uniform, you'd think that goes against the grain almost of just
I think in some cases,
Yeah.
I definitely think it goes against the grain. I mean, I don't think people really want to be clones of each other here, in the United States. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing or anything like that.
Right.
Not making value judgments on it, but I know, like I should say, there's a major portion of the population that just is kind of turned off by my son is now 2.5 years old, and and people are always asking me, when are you going to get him, to do this or that? And it's like, I don't really want him to do. I want to take him to go do wushu, and I want him to do traditional martial art at first. It's like, because they're just much better at that than I am at teaching him, boxing or whatever.
You don't want him being on one of those YouTube videos where he's like 2 years old and hitting the pads like crazy.
Well, I kind of do too.
You kind of do.
But I kind of want him also doing jump 360s.
Right.
Or 520s or whatever they're doing now.
Something that you or I can't do at the moment.
or ever.
Or
Yeah. I'm like, I suppose
Are you giving up already, Andy?
I want to live vicariously through
nice.
my kids' development. Like, I grew up on a farm and I couldn't train till I was 14.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start him when he's 3.
Yeah, understandable. I mean, I didn't even start till, I was 25. Because same reason. I mean, I came from a small town, Yakima. I mean, I'm sure they had karate, but I lived even farther out in the sticks than even in the small city, so...
Right.
It was always very difficult to do something like that. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Mr. Andy Wilson, for being on this podcast.
Okay. Thank you, Dwight. Sorry if I offended anybody. Or...
No one's offended. Who gets offended nowadays? Is there anything you'd like to give a shout out to? Go and visit the MKG website. I think it's
mkgseattle.com is my main website.
Join your Facebook page. Join your Twitter page.
Yes, all those pages. It's the Facebook world now. I can't stand it. But
You can't stand it.
But you can't get away from it.
Do you have a YouTube channel?
We do have a YouTube channel.
Oh, wow.
MKG Seattle USA.
Nice.
It's just a bunch of videos. Go look, it's just a bunch of videos.
It's just a bunch.
Fortunately, we have a lot of pages, but and it's a lot to keep up with. But
No, definitely.
Running a business as well as a martial arts school, you spend more time on the computer than you do training,
Right.
and that's not always where I anticipated being. So we'll see what we can do.
Understandable. Okay, well, you know where you can reach out to him. Reach out on his website, Facebook, all those good things. Thank you, listeners, for listening to this podcast. And this has been another Martial Arts Musings. I am your host, Dwight, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Bam. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Dwight.